No, you can't. Sorry, pal. You can do it after though. She'll be around. Okay. All right, we're on.
We are on.
Got that going for us.
Leslie has finally asked the question.
I'm telling you, I'm still a mess when it comes to the technicality. But why don't you get us started, Kira, while I'm making sure everything looks good.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's so great to have you with us this morning on this Tuesday, February 9th. We are here with our sort of newly titled endeavor, Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. And I am Kira Austin Young, an Episcopal priest. I'm the priest in charge at St. Anne's in Nashville, Tennessee.
And I'm Philip DeVaul at Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Queen City of the Midwest. And we're the crown jewel, really, of the Buckeye State when you get right to it.
Oh wow, that's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim, but the good news is most people outside of Ohio think really bad things about Ohio, so they're not really willing to argue the point. Like, people have this idea of what Ohio is, and so, like, if I'm like, we're the crown jewel of the Buckeye State, they're like, I guess that's fine, have it, right? Whereas inside Ohio, everyone's like, how dare you?
Right.
But I do love it here quite a bit. I can hear you guys and we're recording, so I would love for you all to go somewhere else. We are recording from home today. I don't know about you, usually are. I try to record from the office because no one's in there. But it is, we got like a foot of snow last night.
Wow.
Yeah. Did you guys get any?
We have gotten none.
Yeah.
And Saturday night, there were other areas of Middle Tennessee that got quite a bit of snow. And I actually have a seminarian intern this semester from Sewanee, and he was asking in our Zoom coffee hour, he was like, so did you guys get any snow? And like, I didn't even have anything on our back deck, like nothing on the cars, nothing on like the trash can. And he turned his computer around and it was just like beautiful, like Sewanee winter wonderland.
Well, listen, when you live 30 minutes from the closest like toilet,
Walmart, yeah.
Walmart, same difference. Then you have to be proud of stuff like that. That's what you get. You're like, you have to have. God's throwing them a bone up there on the mountain, right? Yeah. I've lived here for 4.5 years. This is my fifth winter. 16. I think this is my fifth winter, and this is by far the biggest snowfall we've had since I've lived here. Oh. I'm a half New Englander. I spent good portion of my childhood growing up in New England, and so this makes me super, super happy. So welcome everybody. Welcome Mary and Betsy and Lisa. I know we've got some other folks that are joining in. If you are able to watch this later, welcome after the fact. And if you are watching but aren't chatting, you're welcome to be here. Thanks for joining us. And we got a couple questions we're going to answer that have already been sent in. But also, if you have questions, you can either message them to me or Kira while we're talking, and we'll try to multitask. Or you can put it up here on the chat and we'll try to respond live in person, which is, I think, fun and exciting. Right, Kira? Fun and exciting?
Yeah. I mean, it's always like, I can't even prepare for this. I'm just coming with the knowledge that I already have. Like, I haven't done any extra reading.
Okay.
I haven't, like...
But you are describing my favorite way to prepare, which is not to prepare. And I sort of feel like all the work you do throughout your life is the preparation, and then like something happens and you're like, okay, this rather than. So you know what I'm about to say, but not everyone listening knows what this is. There's a thing called that you and I had to do called GOEs.
So I didn't take the GOEs.
You lucky dog. That's why your theology is so suspect. I'm just kidding.
It's true. No,
let me say what they are first. And then you have to tell this story. Okay. One, the general ordination examinations or exams are, they are sort of like, frankly, in its own way, sort of like the bar exam for lawyers, but priests do it. We get, is it 6 or 7? Either 6 or 7. I think it's 7.
Canonical
areas of ministry where we're given a question, a hypothetical, a theoretical question, and we have to answer in essay form. And we have a certain amount of time to do it. We do it over 3 days. Some dioceses do it differently, but the general ordination exams and almost everyone who's an Episcopal priest has had to do this. Some people come from different traditions where they've already been ordained and have gone through equally rigorous, or more perhaps. Example of a question Lisa asks. In my GOE, there was there's subjects are like theology, ethics, pastoral, scripture. What did you say?
Church history,
pastoral ministry, which they call the coffee hour question, the kind of question that someone will like walk up and ask you during coffee hour sort of thing. I don't remember what they all are. It's things like that.
Yeah.
Is there an OT one and an NT? No, it's just scripture.
Yeah, here I'm going to pull up an example of a question. This is from 2020's exam.
Okay.
So this is for the set of Christian theology. And this is the question, or the kind of, setup. A member of your congregation asks to meet with you. Your parishioner shares the diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer despite being a non-smoker with no family history of cancer, and also shares that years ago, a fiance died in an automobile accident. The parishioner asks, "Why is God punishing me? I know I am not perfect, but there are lots of terrible people in the world, and these things don't happen to them." You have a pastoral conversation and pray with your parishioner. Later, you meet with your spiritual director. In a response of approximately 1,000 words, describe to your spiritual director your understanding of God that informed that pastoral conversation, how you believe God acts in this world, and how your concept of God addresses issues of reward and punishment. Your response is to your spiritual director concerning your own understanding of God, and not merely a recounting of your pastoral conversation with your parishioner.
Right.
And so a lot of times they also, like this one, asks you to choose like a specific theologian or a work of art, and choose either a psalter or a liturgy from the Book of Common Prayer, and kind of work that in to your answer.
I remember my scripture question was something along the lines of, there's an example of when the Jesus and the disciples encounter the man who's blind in the gospel according to John, and the disciples say, "Teacher, who sinned, this guy or his father, that he's blind?" Right? That he was born blind. And Jesus says, "No, it's not because of his sin that he's blind. It's so that God can be glorified in what I'm about to do." And then also there's this reading from Luke where he says, "Your sins are forgiven, you are made well." So like, how do you deal with the juxtaposition of Jesus kind of responding to sickness in this way? Like, give us a scriptural thing. And obviously you just read one, so you can hear how detailed they get. The one I'm remembering obviously was more well written and detailed than that, but that was the basic gist of it. The reason I bring it up is, every year before me, from time immemorial, you had to like work in the library, and they would have have books ready. And you didn't know they would have you basically you'd have to quote books or look for know what specific theologians said about something. So so if they asked you the question, you'd have to go run to the library and look things up, or check your books, your personal library of what you had about what Calvin wrote about, the book of Revelation or something, which is a trick question because it's the one book he never wrote a commentary on.
Yeah.
But my year was the first year where they said, there will be the only books that you will need for reference will be the prayer book, the Bible, and the hymnal. And I was and so I had all these people trying to study, and I was like, "What are you doing?" "We're studying." I was like, "You don't know what the questions are." And they're like, "Well, yeah," but I'm like, "And you know that whatever the answer is, you're going to need one of these 3 books. How are you going to study? You're going to read the prayer book to get back to front? What's the prayer? What's the studying?" So it literally the first year of the GOEs, when I took them, it was the first year where it fit my style, which was just say some things and use the books that you like, the prayer book and the Bible and the hymnal. Those are the only things you need. Okay. Tell us your story. How did you do that?
My ordination process was through the Diocese of Texas, and my year was the first year that the Diocese of Texas moved to just a canonical exam model. So we did not take the GOEs. We just did a 3-day intensive, at Camp Allen in Texas with the examining chaplains.
What year was this?
2011?
Yes. Did you see Meg's response?
No.
Look at Meg's response. I studied and it helped. Shrug. And then the female sign, which is to say, it's my masculinity. That meant that hurts a little bit, but it also might be true. I am being very like cis het male right now. Being like, who needs to study?
So we also had to write like essays. And
yeah. Oh, you did canonicals. My friend from West Virginia did canonicals, which isn't it? Okay, so guys, here's another church nerdy thing. Canonical exams is basically the same idea. They're just questions that are written locally and like written by someone in your diocese, right? Mm-hmm. So is that correct?
Yeah. It just like, in some ways, I feel like I didn't get the like hazing that everyone else got in going through the GOEs. But I did take exams. So like,
yeah. I feel like, I do feel like the ordination process is hazing. I also, when I look at it piece by piece, each single element makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's just when you add it all up and then the way that they often treat you ends up feeling like hazing. But it's also tricky. Like, they're handing you, the keys to their franchise. And they've got to make sure that you're not gonna, it's like if they're gonna let you run a McDonald's, you can't sell tacos out of that place.
Yeah.
You gotta know what the
rules
rules are.
Learned a few things while you were in seminary or divinity school or whatever.
Right. So I will say this is a place where I find seminarians as a whole, like the seminary bubble that exists, that maybe you didn't have to deal with, I don't know. But I went to Virginia Seminary, Episcopal Seminary, and it's very much, I loved being there, but it's very much, I left, like graduated, came back to visit, and it was like, I like walked in and you could just feel this pressure energy. And when you're not a part of it, you're like, oh, it's super intense around here. And everyone just, it's like this thing where everyone, and so going into these exams, I think a big part of it like is self-imposed pressure. And like my existence, my future depends on this sort of bar exam stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So Lisa asks, but it's not oral exams, right? That was my worst nightmare. I've heard your exams are really harsh and could be mean. Yeah, they're not oral. We don't have to like just sit in front of people and spout stuff out. Now we do have interviews with people on commissions that ask us questions and we have to respond. Those questions are very rarely like the ones you just heard. Like, what would you do if?
Yeah, mine had an oral exam component.
What?
But it wasn't that aggressive. It was more of like a conversation about sort of like, tell me about, one of your like favorite theologians that you learned about in divinity school. Like, what did you like about that person and their school of thought? And, that kind of conversation. So it wasn't like Jeopardy or trivia or something where it was like,
right.
So I think I did have a question that was like, name the 4 centers of Christianity in like the early church or whatever.
I would not. Jerusalem.
I know one of them was Alexandria, and
I was going to say that's my second guess. So Jerusalem and Alexandria and like Antioch.
Yeah, I think that was like.
I mean, it's sort of one of those things. I'm like Jeff Mason, Constantinople.
And there was one question about where Paul's letters and the Acts of the Apostles like gave different accounts or something like that.
Oh, geez.
So, some of it was
somewhere near the back, I guess.
Yeah, I will say one of the experiences that I really liked about my canonical exams was that they had each of us lead either morning or evening prayer and then preach.
Yeah.
And so like, instead of just like, what do you know about this thing? Or how would you handle this situation? Like they actually got to see us lead worship and preach and then give us, helpful feedback. So that was actually a really good part of it.
It'd be kind of amazing if they made you do like a dry run of a Eucharist, like celebrating it. And then we're just sitting there like literally taking notes like,
Yeah,
Mm,
like you're
I'm gonna give your,
auditioning. Like,
I'm gonna give your Iran's position an 8.
yeah.
But the way I didn't like the epiclesis at all. I mean, it really was like a 3 or 4. I mean, you said the words, but just didn't feel it.
Yeah.
That's what it was like doing liturgy. Did you have like a liturgics class in seminary where you had to do a practicum?
So I did not really. I did have like a liturgy seminar because there were enough of us Anglican Episcopalian types
Yeah.
at Vanderbilt when I was there. So we kind of put together a liturgical seminar, but there wasn't much of a practicum. I mostly did that either like in field education or
Yeah.
stuff like that. So
I don't know why I'm surprised that the Diocese of Texas got rid of the GOEs and switched over to the canonicals. Like when you told me that, I was super surprised, and then I thought about Bishop Doyle and I thought about the culture of that place, and I was like, why did that surprise me at all?
Yeah.
That sounds like a total Texas move. Like, oh, what's everybody else doing? That's interesting. Anyways.
It's also a diocese that has the resources to be able to
That's right.
do quite well.
That's right.
I mean, I think
yeah.
here in Tennessee there are like maybe 3 people on the examining chaplains. Like in Texas, there were like
Right.
8 or 10 or something.
It's just a different environment for sure. Yeah. Do we want to get to the questions?
Yeah, let's do it since we're talking about not preparing for things.
I did give you the questions ahead of time, and so we've now both probably thought of them about the same amount.
Yes.
Do you want to do which heretical question do you want to do first? We have a question from Lisa and we have a question from Kyle, who, by the way, they're friends in real life. Like they go to different churches, but they used to work together and they're like friends. So the 2 questions we're going to be answering are like from pals. How cool is that?
Oh, okay.
You want to do the Catholic Church communion question or the Bible question first?
Let's do the communion question first.
Good. Okay. Shall I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Hi, Kyle. All right, here we go. Communion in Catholic churches. Thoughts about the exclusiveness of it. In my experience, sometimes at weddings, communion is offered to all, although that is not something typically allowed. I have quite a few friends who take communion anytime they are at a Catholic Mass. I feel uncomfortable about doing that, but not sure if I should. So that's more of like less a question and more like a give us your thoughts here, which I like. Make it broad, friend. Yeah, where would you start with this? We want to like set the table for how the Roman Catholic Church, what the official rules are.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't totally do all of my research, so I'm afraid I'm asking something a little bit erroneous, but the Catholic Church primarily restricts communion, the participation in the Eucharist, to those who are Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I don't think that's primarily. I think that's the deal.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a time when they're
like, as you mentioned in the question, like in practice, sometimes that looks a little bit different. I have had friends who are also clergy colleagues who work with Roman Catholic priests through campus ministry who have been invited to receive communion in certain instances. But the general practice, the general rule is that Eucharist is restricted to Roman Catholics.
That's right. And Roman Catholics who I think have done communion a certain amount of time, basically who are basically good practicing Catholics.
Yeah. So like in practice, nobody, you don't go up for communion and they check your certificate or quiz you or something.
Right.
So it's kind of a scout's honor kind of.
Right. And that's right. I mean, you go, I have actually, the denomination in which I grew up, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you cannot take communion unless you are part of their denomination. I grew up in a relatively open church in that they wouldn't check that, but there were LS, what is it called? LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod churches that did you had to have a card.
Yeah.
Like card carrying member is a real thing.
Card carrying member.
And that wasn't the one in which I grew up. So, or as Annie says, or when you go with your Catholic grandmother and she makes you go up with her. And it's not like the Mormon church, as Lisa says, that where you can't even enter a certain space without special okay from your bishop. Yeah. So the Catholic practice is it creates room for people to kind of do what they want to do. So the question is, do you want to follow their rules or not?
Yeah, and so I mean, it's all bound up in the whole like system of what they believe the church is, and the validity of the sacrament, and sort of
Right.
their understanding of what happens in the sacrament. And I mean, if you were to ask me, I would say that to me, the ethical thing to do would be to respect their practice and
Right.
their rules, and abstain from receiving the Eucharist while at a Catholic wedding or whatever. Where that gets, I like, sorry, I'm gonna, like Annie said, I have a lot of parishioners and a lot of just general people that I know who maybe grew up Catholic or were raised in a Catholic church and have since left or come to the Episcopal Church or just no longer practicing. But then when they go home for Christmas, or it's a family funeral or a family wedding or something like that, it's like, well, of course you're going to receive communion, right?
Right.
So that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
It's tricky for me. Like, okay, so as a priest, so the thing is, you and I, we like have actual, like we're company. I always say I'm a company man. Like that's like, where people are like, well, I don't believe this thing about Christianity, and I'm like, oh, you don't have to. I do. Like, I'm a company man. Like I represent the company. Like that's the rule. So once I became a company man, I was like, okay, exactly what you just said. Like I would never go up to take communion. The one time I went to a Catholic funeral, this was right after I got ordained. I actually didn't wear my collar because I wore a suit and tie, because I didn't want to confuse people there that didn't know me or didn't know the church. Why is this Catholic priest not taking communion? Right? Like what's he doing? And because it was a funeral for a friend's dad, I wasn't interested in calling attention to, like, if I'd gone in my clericals and then not taken communion, that could have been very weird for some people. And by going and wearing a tie, no one knew I was even there and I was anonymous, and that was like easier.
Yeah.
But I made the decision to go up and receive a blessing, because I also like, and so I've gone up to receive blessings before. I won't speak cattily. I won't speak snarkily about how unaffected I felt by those blessings. That wouldn't be appropriate at this time. But I before I was ordained and before I was in the process, I would sometimes go with my mother. Converted to Catholicism when she got married again, second marriage, and so I would go with them. And my stepdad, was devout Catholic, was like, "You can come up. You can come up." He like wanted me to feel comfortable taking communion, and so I would sometimes. I was like, "Oh, I'm getting away with something." But now that I do this, like what you said, respect the rules. But I will say, I wouldn't automatically say that that's the case. Like, I do think there is something about, if you are Christian and you're like, that's Jesus, this is Jesus. We believe that. And they don't get to tell me if I get to take it or not. Like, if you feel that way a little bit, first of all, you might be Episcopalian. But I want, like, there's a part of me that gets that. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to tell you never to break the rules, because sometimes we got to break these rules. I can't. And out of, as you said, sort of professional respect, I wouldn't. But I wouldn't fault others if they were to do so. I do think, you got to think through what you think is happening up there and what it means for you. And if you're going to break those rules, why are you breaking those rules?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
I've lately, especially a lot of the questions that I feel like we've gotten, I keep going back to Paul's thing about, like, not all things, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. And I think that's where, we need to sort of think through, like, what we might do. Like, for example, you're going to, not going to this funeral in a priest collar, like, right. It would be lawful for you to go in your priest collar.
Yeah.
And yet, like, as you said, like, that would not be beneficial for the people that were there, for the whole, like, just vibe of
right.
the funeral.
Right. I don't need to be a stumbling block. Right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. So
I love you bringing up Paul in this scenario, because when you I know that people give Paul a hard time, mostly if they haven't read him, or if he's been interpreted for them by people who use Paul for ill gain, who
right.
use Paul for misogynistic purposes, or sort of to maintain some kind of weird control or whatever. But Paul, when you really focus on his letters, all of them, but for me, most especially like First Corinthians and Romans, and Philippians, oh my gosh, the primary emphasis is like, y'all, the way that you experience God is in how you treat each other. Like the communities you build these communities. And if you want to know what it's like to live into the promise for which you were made, it's completely bound up in how you treat each other. Like how powerful. I mean, Romans 12, the climax of Romans is basically, since all these things are true about a God who like enters into a cosmos that's yearning for salvation and does this miraculous thing, since all these things are true, you should probably treat each other well. Like that's the whole thing. So basically love each other and stop being jerks about it. Like what? So I love that you bring that up, because that really is a big piece of it for me. Like how we are understanding ourselves in relationship to one another.
I recently preached not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, just about how like my appreciation of Paul is as a pastor, that he's writing these letters to particular communities because like he's addressing certain problems in those communities, and because like we're all human and there's nothing new under the sun, like these letters got passed around to other communities who like maybe weren't dealing with the exact same thing, but like the shape of it was different, or the shape of it was the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's true even now, is like, oh, these are just letters to our same communities. Like, and no, we're not fighting over meat sacrificed to idols, but we're fighting over other stuff.
Right. But it's the same idea, and it's like in the same principle stands, just like treat each other with love and respect. And Lisa, I mean, I want to really honor the kind of thing that you're feeling, which I experience as well. My family doesn't, there's no boundary. It's just not a boundary. Boundaries don't exist. I feel like I should be like a meaner dad, because they're just not scared of me at all. Like when I yell, they're just like, okay, old man. I'm like, I was terrified of my parents. What am I doing wrong here? Anyways, I do like the idea of here's Jesus, but not for you. I think that's problematic. I do think that there's an emphasis in a lot of churches on your understanding what you're doing before you do it. Like, it's not like and I mean, I think the Catholic Church goes, I mean, I just don't buy the Catholic position, for the record. I don't buy it at all. But
the exclusionary position. Is that what you mean?
I don't know what you just said.
Like the exclusionary position of
the yes, and in particular the idea that you have to be, they read, in my opinion, they interpret the idea of receiving the Eucharist worthily, which is Paul's language, in a way that I don't buy, because for them it means, similar to the church in which I grew up, you have to affirm these, like, not just Jesus, but you have to like not only affirm these specific realities as very specifically defined within our tradition, but also you need to be living in this very particular way for this to be a thing you're worthy to do. So I have some issues with that. This is the very bread of life. This is the body of Christ. You need this for spiritual sustenance, but we will not give it to you unless you act a certain way, is a little, which would make sense if act a certain way was like really extreme circumstances, but it turns out it's not, you know? So hold on one second. I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, I guess I'll sort of like riff while Phil yells at his kids.
I'm back. But
okay.
Riff. No, that was it. That was the riff.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? How do you do with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we should take the sacrament seriously.
Yes.
And you know, the questions that I often get, and that I feel in myself when I am confronted with the Roman Catholic Eucharist, is that like that protestation of like, I do take it very seriously. And in
Yep.
some ways, my Eucharistic theology in terms of like what happens in the Eucharist is very similar to
Yeah.
the Roman Catholic belief. So yeah, part of it, it's like, well, why can't I do this? And I mean, I think there's no God's not going to smite you if you
Right.
you know but again, like, yeah, if you're doing it because it's really important to your grandmother that you take communion with the family, or
Right.
something like that. But if you're going up there because you're like, ha ha ha, they said I can't have it and I'm gonna have it anyway,
Right.
that's not I think a thing that glorifies God.
Right. Right. Although there is I mean, you and I both believe in the possibility of healthy protest,
Yes.
but just like I'm going to do what I want. But even then, like, I don't know. I remember one time my brother went to a funeral of a friend of his who was Catholic. And my brother is, I don't think he'll mind me saying, first of all, he'll never watch this. But secondly, if he were to by accident watch this, I don't think he'd mind me saying very nominally Christian. like by his own admission. He's like, yeah, I'm Christian, like in the sense that I'm not Jewish, like,
Right.
like,
Hopefully Christian.
yeah, I mean, and will belong to a church, which he didn't for a long time. And he and his family will go occasionally and he'll help out. Like, so, my dad was a pastor and he left the ministry before I knew it, like when I was very young, but my brother remembers that stuff really well. So he has a real affinity for like clergy and for churches, and he wants them to be okay. So even if he's not like, I'm all in, when he finds a place he cares about it. But anyway, different, but he's not like the stuff you and I are talking about. Like, he'd be asleep. This does not interest him. The people who are watching this, they care about church nerdy stuff. He doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
He went to this funeral of a friend of his, and they had communion, and it was a Catholic funeral, and he went up. And I was surprised, and he's like, and I was like, you went up, huh? And he's like, yeah. I was like, so what was that about? Like, I'm fine. And he said, I thought about my friend who was dead, and he would have wanted me to take it. And like, my brother's like not a very sentimental dude at all, and he said it with like this total sincerity, and I was like, I don't know if that's true or not, but I can't fault you. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like not that my faulting him would matter anyway, but like that really like hit me. Like, there's stuff like that where these things happen and they don't fit within the rules that we understand, but we go like, all right, come on. Like, that's something. I don't know. Let's see what Leslie says. She says, I feel like I've been invited. If I've been invited, I'll go take communion at a Catholic mass. Otherwise, I'll respect that it is an exclusionary space and it doesn't include me for reasons I could control. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And then Lisa says, I have to respond to Lisa's thing here, Akira, because she said, it's weird when some priests urge non-Catholics to partake. I've been to a couple weddings where I was strongly urged to come forward. I just want to say on behalf of clergy, like, clergy are weird, Lisa. Like, clergy are just weird people. Like, that clergy person shouldn't have done that, and it made you feel awkward, and that's just weird. Like, sorry, like, that's just like, no, don't try to make me do a thing that's against the rules. Come on, man. And we know it was a man.
Yeah, that's true. I do, I've been in circumstances, whether I'm like officiating a funeral or a wedding or whatever, where there is communion. And as an Episcopal priest, I do have to kind of be very explicit about saying like all Christians are welcome to the table.
Yep.
And even still, people feel uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
My ex-husband's family was all Roman Catholic, and occasionally they would come to church, with him and see me, preach and celebrate and stuff. And they were like, "Can I come up for communion?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." And they're like, "And I won't, spontaneously combust." was like, no.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. You and me. I'd be like, oh, I can't guarantee that. Like, you might. There's only one way to find out. You know what I mean? But it won't be because of me.
But like this idea that like it, I mean, in the Roman Catholic view, I'm not a real priest, and that isn't real sacrament. So,
Right.
in some sense, what does it matter? It's just a wafer and some wine.
See, this is where you're not only 100% right, but where I get angry.
Oh, I get super angry.
Because I want everyone to hear that. It's really important. And then I want to get into what Albert asked, because it's connected to this, and we need to talk about the Episcopal stance. We kind of want to not talk about it because we're such a mess, but we do need to talk about it. According to the Catholic Church, Kira and me, both of us,
Yeah,
we are. I mean, more you. Let's be clear.
more
But
me.
but both of us we are not actually priests. Okay. Well, we are priests in our tradition, but that is not the real church.
Right.
So
we're
it's
still priests. We're not.
So like we're faithful people. They've gotten to the point as Catholics where they recognize, at least the Pope and previous popes, not just this one, have recognized like you're clearly also Christian and we're all part of the Christian tradition. But this is Mother Church. Any ordination outside of this is something, but it's not real priesthood. And whatever you're doing is lovely, but it's not the real sacrament. So and that's where I get like ragey.
Oh no, I know. Like, oh, I'm just play acting at
Right.
doing all this stuff.
Right. That hurts, but only if you let it. Mostly I just don't pay attention to it. That's why it's funny when people ask me questions about like the Roman Catholic Church. A lot of our friends did grow up in the Catholic Church and became Episcopalian. You and I did not.
Right.
So when people will talk about like being Catholic or what's going on in the Catholic Church, I'm like, I have no idea. I also don't know what my neighbor's doing next door right now. It's not my business. Like, I don't know, like, it's not that I'm mad. I just said I don't care.
Right.
And I recall like a friend of mine in seminary. I all my closest friends in seminary were the spiky Anglo Catholics, and I'm just not one. And so I remember someone being like, Episcopalians, we all just want to be Catholics when we grow up. And I was like, nope, no, I don't at all want that. So yeah.
There's an amazing article from a few years ago by Sarah Condon on Mockingbird, on the Mockingbird website.
Yeah, she's great.
Called I will drink champagne with your tears, and it was about the the big anniversary of the Reformation.
Right.
And kind of just going through it's become this thing to kind of, especially among more like Anglo-Catholic types, to sort of bemoan that we're not all part of the Roman Catholic Church,
right.
And to seek out ecumenical unity, which I think is good. I think I'm a fan of ecumenism.
Right. Yeah.
But this whole idea that like, the Reformation was such a tragedy, I'm like, I wouldn't be a priest without the Reformation. Like,
right, I wouldn't get to do the things I do. I wouldn't get to be married and have kids. You wouldn't get to be a priest at all. It's ridiculous. No, I mean, it's the same thing as the conversations about unity in our culture right now, where it's like, I'm all for unity, so long as we're interested in justice. But I'm not like I remember a Roman Catholic friend of one of my best friend, he left the Catholic Church and became Episcopalian. It was awesome. His whole family is like worried about him. Mm-hmm. And his brother, who's a lovely guy, I think he's studying to be a deacon in the Catholic Church, comes up to me at one, and I do the baptism for their first kid. Oh. And his whole family's like, they came, but they were like, half of them were like, whatever. Half of them are like normal Catholics, where they're like, whatever, it's baptism, we're here, this is great. Communion, cool, let's go. But there's a good half of them that were like, well, come. We found out from our priest that somehow this does count as baptism, so we'll be here. But this is weird. So the brother asks me afterwards, he's like, but seriously, Phil, do you guys feel like when would you don't you want to be united back with Rome at some point? Like, what do you feel like about unity? Like, how can you claim authority without being connected? And I was like, I'd like for you to ask that question about yourself in the Eastern Church before you ask me that question from a split 500 years later. And he literally was just like, oh, good point. Okay. Like it was done. Like don't talk to us about coming back to Rome when you haven't made amends with the Eastern Church from which you split 500 years earlier. And this whole idea of one true church is so, well, it's Eurocentric. It's pretty cool to call everything white supremacist these days, but it might be. And it's like, oh, the real one true church in Rome. And it's like, meanwhile, millions and millions of Orthodox Christians throughout history, billions maybe, right? Like who have a legitimate claim to a Christian authority have just been completely ignored by Rome and by the West.
Yeah.
So we don't get to talk about unity if we're not talking about unity.
Right.
And about,
Yeah, I would almost say like it may not be white supremacy, but it's certainly like a Western supremacy.
It is. It's a Eurocentric sort of mentality, which I totally fall into a lot. I mean, it's the air I breathe, right?
Yeah, I mean, even like going to the Holy Land, I'm like, the Orthodox churches feel weird, but the Roman
What do they do? Where are the chairs? This is like you go and they're like all into it. And I'm like, there's a lot of tchotchkes here. This could be a little more austere. And it's like, which is just it's totally my baggage. It's completely my baggage.
Yeah.
Albert Gustafson, good question. Just to clarify for me, the Episcopal Church's official position is that people taking the Eucharist should be baptized. Yes, that is the official position of the Episcopal Church, and it is one that has fallen into disfavor among a lot of Episcopalians.
That is in the canons. That is the canonical...
But it is canonically correct. That is a thing that's a thing. I'm filming from home, right? So my wife is like right over here. And so she's like writing down, she just wrote down, but there is so much history there and it's so cool because we went to Jerusalem together. We went to the Holy Land together. And she's right. Like when you see the Eastern tradition in its homeland, and you realize the depth, you realize the 2,000 years of tradition and realize that the church never stopped being church there, then it completely changes your perspective on what Christianity is supposed to look like, right? Yeah. So, okay. How do we want to handle this conversation about baptism?
Yeah, so the canonical position is that to receive communion in an Episcopal church, you should be a baptized Christian.
Yeah.
Again, like I don't check people's baptismal certificates
Right.
at the altar rail.
Right.
But if I know that somebody is in the church and they are coming forward for communion, and I find out later that they are not baptized, that's going to be a conversation that we have.
Yes. This is an issue on which I've gone back and forth literally like since becoming an Episcopalian, however long ago now, 17 years ago or so, 18 years ago. I have been struggling with this since then. And I've literally been erstwhile in both directions. Like I've been like, clearly everyone should be able to take communion. And I've been like, clearly only baptized people should take communion. And now I'm continue to be a mess. When I joined, there's a whole group of people, by the way, who are going to see this and go like, I'm going to be off their list now, just for the record. But when I was interviewing with Redeemer, they were very, very clear. We very much make a practice of baptism, allowing baptism without communion. And we're not going to consider a rector who is not comfortable with that. And I was like, okay, I'm comfortable with that if your bishop's comfortable with that. And I was at the time, and I think I've become less comfortable with it since I've been working with them. But I also feel like, but I'm also fine with doing it for now in terms of meeting them where they are and in terms of like working with a congregation, because there's this idea of I think it's just a miscommunication and frankly, like bad formation that teaches Christians that if you don't get to receive communion, that it's something you get to do or don't get to do. And that if you don't do it, it's inhospitable. Right. So but here's my thing in practice. All the words are here. I get up and I say, this is my body, this is my blood. And then when I hand it to people, I say, this is the body of Christ. If someone puts their hands out and takes it, knowing all that, like, I'm not going to refuse Jesus to someone who puts their hands out and says, I say, this is Jesus, who we've just talked about. Here's the creed. Here's the whole prayer. We've set the whole, we read the bylaws of the Christian faith. Like, here's Jesus. And they go, yes, please. I'm going to give it to him. So it's like, I believe in reserving it for people who've been baptized in terms of the rules, in terms of the norms, in terms of like saying that should be the norm.
Yes.
But in practice, it's not just that I like will fudge the rules. In practice, I am genuinely fine with giving someone who hasn't been baptized communion. I want, as you said, I want there to be a follow-up and a conversation. I want that to be an opportunity for deeper connection and discipleship and the possibility of baptism.
Yeah, I think the concept of what's normative is really helpful in this situation, because I think it should be normative, and I mean, that's what the canons say,
right? That
somebody is baptized before they receive communion.
Right.
There are certainly circumstances that happen outside of those norms, and like going back to my Roman Catholic family in-law, you're not going to like hopefully spontaneously combust if you take communion before you are baptized. But the normative understanding of that Eucharistic meal is that it's a family meal, and it's a family that we are initiated into through our baptism. And so I think that part of it is important. But like this conversation about Roman Catholic Eucharist, you know, to be there, to be in a church or whatever, and see everyone go up and like not go up, or like go up and like get a blessing instead, like it feels weird. And I think that's where our hospitality conversation comes in, is like, we don't want people to feel weird.
Which is funny. Like, you're right, but like, what's so bad about feeling weird?
I think church should absolutely make us feel weird.
Thank you. But I mean, so how can we create a space where you are completely welcomed and loved and cared for? And also, this is weird. Guys, the ritual is weird.
The ritual is weird. We wear weird clothes when we do it.
We wear funny clothes. We say funny words. And then we say, this is Christ's body and blood. Come on up and eat and drink it. And then we're like, we want to be hospitable. So we're going to offer this body and blood to everybody. And it's like, it's weird. Y'all were weird. To answer Lisa's question, I think this is the right answer of why we're not practicing that in every church. I mean, I think you have congregations that have this understanding that a lot of recovering Catholics, and so self-described recovering Catholics, who've left at other churches and have been treated with like exclusion, like been part of an exclusionary practice. And they've been taught that the Episcopal Church is about welcoming you in. And so when they hear the idea that this is not for everybody, they think that it's Catholic Church light or Catholic Church part redux.
Yeah.
And that makes them nervous. And so I get that, you know. I don't think, and I used to have in huge letters in my bulletin in my old church, all are welcome to receive. And it doesn't say that in our bulletin. I actually don't think you need it to say anything.
Yeah.
It turns out, you know, but people will self-select, and you can create space for conversation there. Right?
I will say some of the more powerful moments around the Eucharist for me as a priest have been when I have baptized somebody, and then in the setting of that same service, they then come forward and receive Eucharist for the first time.
Yes.
Like, just every time, tears, both of us are crying. Like, it's such a special thing. And maybe it's not, you know, I'm thinking of a particular time, and maybe it wasn't her first time ever to receive the Eucharist. But she had made a practice of abstaining.
Yes.
You know, leading up to her baptism.
And I've had that experience as well, where I've had people come and talk to me and say, what's your practice? And I said, same thing. Here's the norm. if you put your hands out, I'm going to give it to you. Some people don't. It's up to you. Like, and I won't refuse it to you, but some people do this, and this is what to think about. I want to point something out. This is really important to me. I hope we get to the next question. We may not, but communion is such a big topic. Leslie said something that's super important that I very rarely just openly disagree with Leslie. And I'm gonna, Leslie, get ready. We want people to feel the community, she said. We want people to feel the community created by the communion and welcome them into the fold. And the other thing she says, it's like a free trial. If someone's looking into joining the church and is excluded from communion behind the paywall of baptism because they haven't yet fully subscribed, they won't see community. Okay. Here's my concern. Okay. One, if the only way you experience community at an Episcopal church is through communion, then the church has a lot bigger problems. A lot bigger problems. If you go to a space and you are welcomed in every real and honest way, but made clear, like, if you haven't been baptized, this thing is for people who are baptized, like, kind of sit back and watch. Not like you don't get to have it, just why don't you see what it's like for those of us, like what it means for us, and you can come up and you can receive a blessing. You can sit right by everybody else, and you can even participate in the ritual in almost every way. There's this thing that is, okay, now if we could do that in a way that was hospitable, that's one thing. If your idea of hospitality, I just feel like a lot of churches don't know how to treat people, is what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah. And
I'm using a lot of words to say, I think a lot of churches don't know how to treat people. And here's the big thing. You said the community created by the communion. In the church, communion is not the thing that creates community. It is baptism that creates the community. We have a baptismal covenant that is the defining feature. And this is, by the way, this is across not just denominations, but traditions. This is human. Every human community and institution has what we would call initiation rites. And communion is not the initiation rite. Baptism is the way that you get brought into the community. And since the beginning of the church, the idea around communion was that this is the way, this is spiritual food for the baptized, because we believe that something actually happens to you in baptism. And so there's some part of your soul that is awakened in baptism that is then nourished in communion in a way that nothing else can nourish it. And so am I saying anything out of line here, Kira, or does that sound about?
No, yeah, not at all.
So
I just think it's important to even just think about like other organizations that you might be a part of. Like, you can't be a voting member of certain organizations without paying dues or without, being somehow making your commitment to that group explicit and clear.
Right.
So this isn't like a new, it isn't the church being mean, like, which I think is, unfortunately, there's been so much spiritual abuse by the church, so much, harm and trauma done by the church that oftentimes we interpret any kind of ask or requirement as a kind of like abuse, and that's on the church 100%.
Right.
But I want to be very, very careful about us, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, the baptismal water.
Right. Well, and as Leslie continues, but if you're welcomed but excluded from the rituals that undermine the concept of the church for the people who are just getting into the idea of Jesus, it might undermine it. But again, if the only it's one ritual in the midst of a lot of rituals. And so my big concern is there's so many ways for us to experience being church. When I became Episcopalian, I started not by going to church. I was going to what was a modified alpha class, a class on a Wednesday evening that was dinner and conversation and about Jesus and about stuff like we're talking about now, like Christianity 101, ask questions. And I went to that for 7 or 8 weeks before I ever went to the church on Sunday. Because I wasn't ready to go to the church, because going to church meant something very specific. And so if our it's I think it's not just about the ritual. It's about what we believe is happening in that ritual, and that we understand that if you're taking it, it's supposed to mean something about you. That's the trick. And I get, like, Leslie is a person, and she and I connect on this, I believe. She's better at it than I am, but we connect spiritually in the idea that where are the people in the margins, and are we treating them exclusively or inclusively? But I think this is an issue of Christendom, by the way, because if you, as a person who grew up in a Christian tradition, went to a Muslim service, and there was something you weren't allowed to do, you'd probably be like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. I don't really understand what's going on here. Right? Or like if you go to a Jewish service and you get to put on the yarmulke, you cover your head the way you're supposed to, and you sit where you're supposed to if it's but there's certain things they're going to do, and you're going to be like, yeah, I don't really know if okay, well, I'm here. Okay. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to, like, but because we grew up in a quote unquote Christian culture, we think that we should be able to do anything that happens in that church. And when we're not allowed to, we take it as it's because we're part of a culture where Christianity has been the dominant religion, dominant practice, and it's been used to harm people. And so we have a strange feeling when we go to a church and it's treated in any way that might seem exclusive. And that's tricky, right? I
attended a bar mitzvah this past Saturday on Zoom, and I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
Even though, the mother of the person being bar mitzvah had sent out a program, had sent out a prayer book, everything that we might need to kind of follow along, and I still could not hack it. And so, I just kind of sat there and let the experience wash over me.
Yeah, and it's great.
And it was so beautiful and meaningful. And, I do think there is something to, not like deliberately making it challenging, but also accepting that we are doing something that's weird. And so there may be a learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not sure if you're seeing the conversation that's ongoing on the side with Leslie and Lisa. There's more to it. And I want to be clear that we're talking with sort of like, we're giving our best arguments for why we think it is this way. But this is very clearly a very, not only complex issue, but one that is really not resolvable fully. Because when you resolve it just like this, that's when you end up being like, we create these divisions. And that's why I try to differentiate between what's normative and what the practice is.
And another thing to consider is that, do we really believe that if we unworthily receive the Eucharist, that we are eating and drinking damnation upon ourselves?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that next week, because I hate the way that verse is used.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people use it in a way to say, if you don't understand what's going on, you eat and drink to your damnation. When I look at Paul saying that, he's saying that to people who are actively excluding people from the table and then taking communion. Actively, like, because they're poor, by the way. Not because they don't believe the right thing or whatever. Like, they're excluding people. Their practice is to treat people as if they're creating class systems within their church and then taking communion like they're all the same. And he's like, he calls bullshit on that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it can't be applicable outward. We just talked about how these things can be applicable in other cases. So I don't think, it's you can use that. How we use that is something we want to be sort of careful with, right? Not to say you weren't careful. That's a whole thing. We could do a whole episode just on that, I think. But Leslie and Lisa are becoming liturgists. They're going to figure it out for me and tell me how to say it. No, I know. This is like a thing that we work on. I love the questions and I love what you're writing. I'm thinking these things through. We got to keep working on it. Something to consider is that what Kira pointed out much earlier in this conversation, which is that the norm, not just the norm, the rule of restricting communion to people who've been baptized is cross-denominational and historical Christianity back to, as far as we can tell, as early as at least at the latest, the early 2nd century. At the latest, the early 2nd century. One of the earliest traditions in the church is communion, and one of the preceded by baptism, and one of the earliest traditions in the church is that communion is for people who are baptized Christians. So we want to be aware of the fact that when it's been like that for 2,000 years, that there's reasons for that we don't have to therefore say, oh, because it's been happening for 2,000 years, therefore it can never change. We're not saying that. But we don't also just go, well, this makes some people feel uncomfortable, so we're going to get rid of it. Like when something's been that central to the practice for 2,000 years, we've got some work to do to try to think about what the deal is, right? Like we got to think through all of that. Okay.
Right. And people also used to be asked, in the early church, non-Christians were asked to
leave. Or all the Christians would go into a separate room.
Yeah.
I mean,
So we've made some progress.
Yeah, and Leslie, in the end, your very last thing that you just said is where I fall down, right? Or where I come down on the same place. She says, I agree that communion should be for those who are baptized, but I don't think it should be withheld from people who have not been baptized yet. Like I said, if someone walks up to me and puts their hands out for Jesus, I'm gonna give them Jesus. But there needs to be conversation, because the whole point of communion isn't that you're a nameless, faceless person in the crowd who gets their sacrament and leaves. We're trying to foster and create community. If you are a non-Christian who is feeling called to receive communion, we've got stuff to talk about. And churches have to do a better job of really fostering community and connection. So that it's not just that you got your thing or that everybody else was doing it, so did I, right? Okay. We were going to talk about the canon. We were going to talk about the Gospel of Thomas, and we didn't at all. So we're going to start with that next week. Can we start with that next week, Kira?
The Gospel of Thomas, yes.
Because we got to talk about that, and that's all about, we get into canonization, we get into biblical stuff. If we disappointed you today, boy, are we going to disappoint you next week.
I just want a situation where like a Diet Coke magically appears from.
You were really cool about not saying anything about that. I was wondering if you were gonna. She literally was. My wife was right here, and mine was empty, and like I literally was pointed at it, and I thought she was gonna come sit down, but she just handed it to me on screen, and I was like, and then she disappeared, and I was like, I feel a little bit like a king right now. That's not how my life normally works, for the record, but it made for good television.
It did.
You knew about the Diet Coke button at the White House, right?
I did. I was going to say, it's like your own personal Diet Coke button.
When people ask me if there's anything that President Trump did that I was okay with, I always go immediately to the Diet Coke button. That he had a button on his desk that he pressed, and when he pressed it, someone showed up with a Diet Coke. Although I say that jokingly because I love Diet Coke so much and I love the idea of pressing a button, someone showing up. But the more I think about it, the more horrible it is.
I would just be a caffeinated mess.
Oh no, not from that end. From the idea that because I'm president, the line between president and king is really blurred there.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Before we go, because it's time, we're late.
We're late.
What have you been listening to this last week?
So I have been listening to, I've been trying to work out a little bit more to, get my endorphins up and quell some of the anxiety. And I listened to a lot of Megan Thee Stallion while I am on my bike in the basement.
I don't know her at all because I'm very meh. Is that hip hop?
It's like rap. And it's.
Do people still call it hip hop? Am I that old? Is it the hip hop? Is it the rhythm and blues?
It is a little vulgar for my normal taste, but
sure. That's what you're telling people so they won't judge you. Got it.
But I will say, it definitely gets me through a workout. So
yeah, I'm looking through my playlist right now to see what I've been digging into. Yes. John. Okay, so I was listening to John Prine the last couple days. His last album in particular, which is fantastic. And then I've been listening to, like I told you, I've been listening to a lot of like classical lately. And some Iris Dement. Do you know who Iris Dement is?
No, you've brought her up before.
Yeah. And then I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I like specifically. There was some other stuff that I specifically was jumping into, but I'm trying to remember what it was. But I'll probably forget just in time. Oh, man, I was just like all James Brown this past weekend, and it was great. I just love James Brown so much. All right. Well, keep listening. Keep listening to your.
This morning.
Who was it again? What was their name?
Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah, I've heard of her. Okay. Yeah, we won't tell other people to listen to her, but do your thing. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This was the first time where we've officially been live as Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. This is our new thing that we're doing. I'm really excited. We thank you all for joining us. For Leslie and Lisa and Betsy and Mary and Albert. And if Kyle, when you get to join, sorry we didn't get to your question today. We will get to it next week. And anyone else is with us. Kira, any last words? Any final?
Just, be safe, wear a mask, wash your hands.
Don't touch your face or other people's faces.
No.
And we'll see you next week.
All right. Great to be with y'all.
Now I got to awkwardly turn us off while we're standing here. Should have already had